I'm Jeremy Phillips and I'm Head of Road User Safety at National Highways. And I'll be discussing the work that we've been doing to try to understand more about the challenges that we face, that we all face when trying to put the safe system into practice. And also our ongoing work to understand the international experience of safe system in a practical real world context. And the experience and the mindset of our national partners and our own developing approach to safe system within our organization. So in the context of discussing what it is that we've learned, what it is that we're still learning, and what we will do next, I'll run through the outcomes of the work that we commissioned on the international experience, similarly work that we're currently completing on an introspective look at national highways and safe system, and also a snapshot view of where our partners are in terms of safe system commitment and alignment. I'll also discuss some of the constraints within which we or any individual actor have to work when operating within a safe system model, what I think that means for our own responsibilities within the system, some actions that we've already taken to reflect that, and finally, the nature of some of the challenges that exist in trying to operationalize the system. And by operationalize, I mean moving it beyond a means of generally structuring our thinking around road safety and into a position where it can be applied in a very practical sense to a defined and limited problem. And here's a spoiler alert, I won't be able to provide any answers on that, at least not yet. So as regards the international experience, we thought it was important as part of a general review of where National Highways is at with Safe System to understand where we are in the international context. In UK terms, I think we'd be fairly described as a relatively early adopter, but elsewhere there's earlier experience still, and thinking and practice have developed a lot since we signed up in 2015. Certainly the experience of what it means to try to apply safe system in the real world, that has definitely developed over the last few years. The scope of the study included the wider European experience and experience in Australasia. It was encouraging to see that there were common themes emerging across different jurisdictions, all of which we would recognize. There's still a commitment to eradicating KSI as an outcome of collisions. There's an acceptance that road user compliance is required for safety critical rules. There's a belief that vehicle design may one day manage extreme behaviors, but not in the near future. And there should be no relaxation on education, on enforcement, and good road design. One thing in which we were particularly interested were the things that typically got in the way of safe system gaining traction. The feedback on that included the belief that there was a lack of clear vision for what the road network needs to look like by a given date in order to achieve zero fatalities and serious injuries. Some found that their leaders were perhaps still poorly informed about safe system, overly cautious, especially around enforcement, speed management, and infrastructure investment, and that they took a more reactive approach than the proactive approach that's really required within the safe system model. There was thought to be a lack of coordination on implementation within and across responsible agencies, and several people were still using the term working in silos. There was a lack of collaboration around data gathering and data use, and the length of time needed to evaluate interventions was an issue because it got in the way of innovation. Practitioners, where we discussed things with them, felt that they lacked the time and the flexibility to try new approaches. And finally, road safety risks, especially speed, weren't always considered obvious to road users, and intuitive interventions were often not the most effective. What that means in practice is that there was investment in ineffective interventions that appease the public, but don't necessarily result in safety improvements, whilst effective but unpopular interventions tended to go underfunded. The decision filter was also really interesting. So taking the original vision, but diluting that vision through a number of barriers, including policy conflicts, technical expertise, an inability to influence funding, the challenges of an inherited network and an inherited speed hierarchy, public acceptance, and an absence of evidence, until what is left is a compromise, and even that compromise requires decades of effort to implement. Now, the lessons learned from all of this are both positive and negative. On the positive side, we know that what's needed is a coordinated and committed leadership with a detailed plan, Long-term goals, a commitment to invest in key performance indicators capable of tracking progress against the ambition. There's also a strong and coordinated communication platform needed, at least part of which is directed at creating a strong demand for change. And all of that supported by research and innovation driving the change. The less positive lessons learned are that Safe System provides really only a set of principles and a framework. It's not a tool in itself that enables change. It relies on as yet undelivered innovations. It doesn't fully define the role of the road user or the nature of the safety culture within which the road user is expected to operate. Suicide prevention isn't considered, and despite the association with a zero target, Safe System doesn't actually offer any solutions for the final hard yards dealing with the most extreme and habitual behaviors. Understanding the international experience, though, is only part of taking a look at where we are in a world of Safe System. So we've also committed to looking inward, and we're using the Hudson Safety Cultural Maturity Model to help us to do that, something that's been applied in the world of occupational health, safety and well-being recently within national highways. But similarly, we're taking a moment in time to get a sense of where our partners are in this space, which is an essential part of our approach to risk management, because we recognize that risk is introduced from outside of our network. And we also recognize that by extension, we can export risk onto other networks. So if we're right about Safe System being the best available option for addressing casualty reduction, then it follows that our networks are safer if our neighbors are adopting the same approach. So it felt timely and appropriate to ask our neighbors about their level of buy-in to Safe System and where they were in adopting the model and what their approach was to that. And that work will be discussed later by Tanya Fosdick, so I'm not going to go into any detail on that now. But whatever our own position in respect of the international or domestic Safe System experience, one thing that we can be certain of is that whilst we may own the targets and own the performance indicators associated with the system, we don't actually own the means of achieving them. In fact, no single actor does. So as uncomfortable as that feels, we know that we're in the very good company of every other duty carrier or signatory to a local or regional target. And I think it's crucial that we're honest and open about that. And on the positive side, there are elements of the system over which we do have high degrees of control. In our case, that's the safe roads pillar. And in fact, that control isn't just high, it's unique. If the action doesn't come from us, generally speaking, the action is not going to happen at all. Now, of the remainder of the system, we have no direct control, but we do have influence, and we can motivate, we can enable, and we can support other actors. And whilst that's a positive position to be in, it doesn't actually guarantee anything, especially when those other actors are not in themselves statutory duty carriers of one type or another, or whose priorities may ultimately lie elsewhere. And then there are the things over which we have neither control nor influence, but which are nevertheless instrumental in delivering and determining safety outcomes, including demography, population growth, economics, and public health. And in much the same way as we have to accept that there are limitations to our control and our influence over the model, any sustainable safe system approach has to acknowledge that it doesn't exist in isolation. Other agendas that compete for primacy and compete for resource, and legitimately so. Carbon and pollution reduction, digitization, and the electrification of the fleet, all of these things offer opportunities. Economic growth, freedom of choice, especially modal choice, and speeds that facilitate the purpose of the route, all of these present significant barriers to casualty reduction, but they represent legitimate factors in the wider system within which the safe system exists. So our challenge is to understand the conflicts and manage them, recognize the potential for negative impacts and mitigate for them, and recognize where there's common purpose and exploit its potential. But whilst our control is limited, our responsibilities are less constrained, and there are positive actions that we can take across the system. So under the roads pillar, we have the full spectrum of responsibilities from design and construction to maintenance and operation. Under speed, we can review the appropriateness of our limits and manage user speeds, including through support and enforcement. We can also influence road user behaviour, help in a coordinated effort to preserve life at a collision scene, and encourage higher standards of vehicle maintenance, and influence both the supply and the demand sides of the automotive industry to aspire to having a safer fleet. And we've invested already heavily in IRAP star rating assessments to track our network safety standards and influence future design. We've also developed some of the lead safety indicators which are essential to a focused safe system operation. We've created the largest fatal collision database in Europe to support our research work, and we've supported Thatcham Research in its work to inspire a new Euro van cap standard to close the gap on commercial vehicle safety. We've also started using the Safe System framework to shape our responses to specific problems. The motorcycle safety framework is a current example, part of which will be delivered directly and partly through one of the pilot projects supporting the National Roads Policing Review. But this is a really early example, and there's still a lot more to be done on visualizing and enabling a safe system approach to be applied to addressing a specific and defined problem. I think where there's some really exciting new ground to break is in finding ways of applying safe system thinking at a route level, bringing us closer, route by route, to safe people traveling in safe vehicles on safe roads. And with the additional safety net of knowing that post-collision response will mitigate the effects of any single collision event. But this does come with some very real challenges. How do we know, for example, that the right balance of measures has been found when developing a blended, multi-agency, multi-initiative response to a problem? How do we coordinate the inputs of multiple factors? How do we reconcile the different timeframes within which those actors operate? How do we ensure that all of our partners and collaborators can sustain their involvement over the life cycle of the project? And fundamentally, how do we get the road user to play their part? So I think road user behaviors and their choices are the glue that binds the pillars together. Every action taken and every choice made, from routes to travel, from vehicles to drive, how they interact with the built and the live environment, their investment in developing skills and knowledge, their preparedness to use them, all of these things affect net outcomes. Traditionally, the safe system has asked two things of the road user: to be compliant in safety critical behaviors and to demand more and better of others within the system. And traditionally, we have been very poor at both. But that failure, along with the errors, lapses, and violations that precede collisions themselves, they're predictable. And because they're predictable, we have to try to accommodate them. We have a duty to try to manage them. But that duty doesn't diminish the extent to which they stress the system and they undermine our collective ability to deliver safer travel. Finally, then, we need to build on the work that we've already done and build on the understanding that we've gained. So we'll complete our internal assessment, we'll digest the results of the national review, we'll develop a blueprint for action under the Safe System model at a network level, and we'll seek buy-in and support from our stakeholders in delivering that blueprint. And we'll also continue to work on developing approaches to safety solutions at a route level that represent more than just a range of activities that are recognizable under each of the Safe System pillars and are instead more of a systems-based response to the problem. Thank you very much for your attention.